Experts analyzed this 1862 portrait, and the enslaved woman's hand hid a macabre secret. Dr. Rebecca Harrison wiped sweat from her forehead as she climbed the narrow stairs of the Beaumont estate in Natchez, Mississippi. The August heat clung to her skin like damp cloth. She had traveled from Boston for this, the estate sale of one of the oldest plantation families in the South. The Beaumont family had occupied this land for over 2 centuries. Now the last descendant, Virginia Beaumont, had died without heirs. Everything was being liquidated: furniture, documents, and dozens of paintings that had hung on these walls since before the Civil War. Rebecca's specialty was antebellum portraiture, particularly the complex social dynamics captured in formal family paintings. She understood how these portraits functioned as propaganda, carefully constructed images designed to project power and legitimacy. But she also knew how to read between the brushstrokes, to see what the subjects wanted hidden. In the main parlor, beneath a water-stained ceiling, she found it. The portrait was massive, nearly 6 feet tall, showing a woman in her 30s seated in regal splendor. The brass plaque on the frame read, "Catherine Beaumont, 1862. Catherine wore an emerald green silk gown that would have cost a fortune even in peacetime. Her dark hair was arranged elaborately with pearls woven through it. Diamonds glittered at her throat and ears. She sat in a carved mahogany chair, one hand resting on a marble-topped table, the other draped across her lap. Her expression was serene, almost ethereal, but it was the second figure that made Rebecca's breath catch. Behind Catherine stood an enslaved woman in her early 20s, wearing a plain gray dress with white collar. Her face was beautiful but expressionless, her eyes fixed on some distant point. Her posture was rigid, body angled slightly away, as if trying to minimize her presence. One hand hung at her side, the other was pressed against her stomach, fingers curled inward in an odd, unnatural position. Rebecca moved closer. Something about that hand seemed wrong. Rebecca squinted at the hand. The anatomy was correct. The artist had skill, but the gesture itself was strange, tense, deliberate. The fingers weren't relaxed or naturally positioned. They were gripping something, holding something tight against her body. "You interested in that one?" The estate appraiser appeared at her elbow. "Pretty piece. Artist was a local man named Robert Sullivan. Did portraits for all the wealthy families around Natchez before the war." "What happened to him?" Rebecca asked, still studying the painting. "Died in 1863, yellow fever." The appraiser consulted his notes. "The painting's been authenticated. Original frame, original canvas. Some water damage, but remarkably well preserved." Rebecca barely heard him. Her mind raced through possibilities, questions, interpretations. "Who's the woman standing behind Catherine Beaumont?" The appraiser shrugged. "Servant, I suppose. They usually included them in portraits to show off the household, part of displaying wealth." But Rebecca knew it was more than that. Enslaved people appeared in antebellum portraits according to strict visual codes, usually positioned to emphasize distance between enslaver and enslaved, rendered less detailed than white subjects. Yet this woman had been painted with the same careful attention as Catherine. Her face was individualized, her features distinct and memorable. And that hand, that strange, clenched hand, suggested intention, agency, something hidden. "I want it," Rebecca said firmly. "I'll take this portrait." 3 weeks later, the portrait arrived at her museum's conservation lab in Boston. Rebecca had assembled a team: Dr. James Chen, chief conservator; Dr. Nina Osei, specialist in African American material culture; and Martin Kowalski, forensic imaging expert. They gathered around the painting on a padded examination table under bright LED lights. "Let's find out what she's hiding," Rebecca said. James had already completed initial assessment. Structurally sound. Some cracking from water exposure, minor paint loss, but overall, excellent condition. "What about the figures?" Rebecca asked. "Everything appears original. Same canvas, same paint composition throughout." Nina moved closer, studying the enslaved woman's face. "She was real. This isn't a generic representation. Sullivan painted an actual person with distinctive features. Look at her eyes. He captured something there. Some emotion he was trying to preserve." Rebecca nodded. The woman's expression, while carefully controlled, held a depth that suggested an inner life, a consciousness aware of its own position. "Let's focus on the hand," Rebecca said. "Martin, can you get detailed images?" Martin wheeled over his high-resolution camera equipment. He spent the next hour photographing the hand from multiple angles using different lighting techniques and filters. The results appeared on the large monitor. Everyone leaned in. Under magnification, the strangeness became more apparent. The fingers were definitely gripping something. The knuckles showed tension, tendons visible beneath the skin. Sullivan had painted the anatomy with precision, capturing the strain of holding something tightly concealed. "There's something there," Martin said, adjusting contrast. "See this shadow between her fingers? That's not just fabric. There's an object, something small, pressed against her palm." "Can you tell what it is?" Nina asked. Martin shook his head. "Not with visible light photography, but we have other options." He glanced at James. "What about infrared reflectography?" James nodded slowly. "It's non-invasive. We use it to see underdrawings and pentimenti, earlier versions hidden beneath surface layers. If there's something beneath the visible paint, infrared might reveal it." They spent the afternoon setting up the infrared camera system. The technique worked by capturing light in wavelengths beyond human vision, penetrating through paint layers to reveal what lay beneath. When Martin finally projected the infrared image on the monitor, the room fell silent. The woman's hand appeared ghostly white, the paint layers becoming partially transparent. And there, clearly visible between her clenched fingers, was the outline of a small object, roughly circular, perhaps 2 inches in diameter. "What is that?" Nina whispered. Rebecca stared, mind racing. It was deliberate. Sullivan had painted it intentionally, hiding it in plain sight. "We need X-ray fluorescence," James said, his voice tight. "It'll tell us the elemental composition of the paint in that area. Different pigments contain different metals. If we can identify what Sullivan used to paint that object, it might give us a clue." The X-ray fluorescence analysis took 2 days. Martin systematically scanned the entire painting, focusing particular attention on the woman's hand. The spectrometer measured characteristic X-rays emitted by different elements in the paint, creating a chemical map. When the results came back, James sat down heavily. "This is extraordinary. Look at the composition of the paint Sullivan used for that hidden object." Rebecca and Nina crowded around the screen. The spectral analysis showed unusually high concentrations of lead white, bone black, and, most significantly, red ochre, mixed with vermilion. "He painted it to look like flesh," James said. "Skin tones. He used the same pigment mixture he used for painting human skin, but darker, more saturated. And the shape? He pulled up the infrared image, overlaying it with the XRF data. It's circular, irregular around the edges, with these thin extensions here and here." Nina's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God, it's a finger." The words hung in the air. Rebecca felt the temperature drop, felt her skin prickle with sudden comprehension and horror. "A severed finger," Nina continued, voice shaking. "She's holding a severed human finger in her hand." Martin zoomed in on the infrared image, enhancing contrast. The object's shape became clearer. The rounded tip, the slight tapering, even the suggestion of a fingernail at one end. "Why would Sullivan paint this?" James asked. "Why hide something so macabre in a formal portrait?" Rebecca's mind worked through implications, historical context, meaning. Because he was documenting something that happened in this household, something Catherine Beaumont wanted hidden, but Sullivan felt compelled to preserve. "But whose finger?" Nina asked quietly. "And how did she come to have it?" 2 weeks later, Rebecca and Nina sat in the climate-controlled reading room of the Natchez Historical Society, surrounded by boxes of fragmented documents and crumbling newspapers. They had been searching for 3 days, working through meticulous records kept by the Society's archivists. The war had dominated local news in 1862. Natchez had fallen to Union forces that September. Newspapers reflected a community in crisis, shortages, casualties, heated debates about loyalty. But buried in the August 10, 1862 edition of the Natchez Courier, Nina found something that made her call Rebecca over immediately. The article was small, tucked at the bottom of page 3 under Local Incidents. Tragedy at Beaumont Estate. Authorities were summoned to the Beaumont plantation on the evening of August 6th following reports of a disturbance. Mrs. Catherine Beaumont reported that one of her servants, a woman called Dinah, had become violent and attacked another servant with a kitchen knife, resulting in grave injury. Dinah was subdued and confined pending investigation. Rebecca's hands trembled as she photographed the article. August 6, 1862. The portrait is dated late August. Sullivan probably started painting within days of this incident. They searched frantically for follow-up articles. 3 days later, on August 13th, another brief notice appeared. Resolution at Beaumont Estate. The matter of the disturbance reported last week has been resolved privately. Mrs. Beaumont has declined to pursue formal charges, and the matter is considered closed. Resolved privately, Nina said bitterly, which means Catherine Beaumont punished Dinah herself, without involving authorities who might ask inconvenient questions. Rebecca sat back, processing implications. Dinah attacked someone with a knife and caused grave injury. Catherine covered it up, and then, within weeks, she commissioned a portrait that includes Dinah, and includes evidence of what happened. The finger, Nina said. Dinah is holding the finger of whoever she attacked. But whose finger? They spent the rest of the day searching for additional information, medical records, property records, anything revealing who had been injured. They found the answer in an unexpected place: Catherine Beaumont's personal correspondence, preserved in a collection donated to the Historical Society in the 1920s. A letter dated August 20th, 1862, written to Catherine's sister in Vicksburg, described the incident in Catherine's own words. Rebecca read it aloud, voice tight. "Dearest Margaret, I write to inform you of a most distressing incident. You will recall my telling you about difficulties managing the household since Thomas's death. The servants have grown increasingly difficult. Last week, Dinah, you remember her, committed an act of shocking violence against Samuel, our driver. She attacked him in the kitchen with a knife, severing his finger before the other servants could restrain her. Samuel's injury is grave. I have dealt with Dinah accordingly. She has been severely punished and will serve as an example that such behavior will not be tolerated. Mr. Sullivan is currently painting my portrait, and I have insisted that Dinah be present during the sittings as a reminder of her transgression and my authority." Nina's eyes were wet with tears. She mutilated Dinah. That's what dealt with accordingly means. She cut off Dinah's finger as punishment, an eye for an eye, and then forced her to hold it during the portrait sessions. Rebecca felt sick. The full horror of what the painting documented was now clear. Catherine had commissioned the portrait to celebrate her authority during wartime, her ability to maintain control. She had forced Dinah to stand there holding her own severed finger as a demonstration of power, but Sullivan had seen something else. He had witnessed an atrocity and found a way to document it, hiding the evidence in the painting where it would survive, long after Catherine's intended message had faded. "We need to find out what happened to Sullivan," Rebecca said. "We need to understand why he did this." Nina was already searching. Robert Sullivan, born Pennsylvania, 1821, trained as an artist in Philadelphia before moving to Natchez in the late 1840s. Then she found something that made everything click into place. "Rebecca, look at this." Nina turned her laptop screen. Philadelphia newspaper from 1838. Robert Sullivan attended an anti-slavery lecture at a Quaker meeting house. And here, 1840, he's listed among members of the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society. Rebecca leaned forward, reading quickly. He was an abolitionist, or at least he had been in his youth. Then he moved south and built a career painting the very people who enslaved others. He must have witnessed terrible things, Nina said quietly. Been forced to smile and socialize with enslavers, to paint them as noble and dignified while knowing the truth of how they lived. James, who had been listening via video call, spoke up. And when Catherine Beaumont forced Dinah to stand there holding her own severed finger during the portrait sessions, Sullivan saw an opportunity. He could paint what he witnessed, hide the evidence in plain sight, create a record that might someday be discovered. Rebecca pulled up the high-resolution photographs of the painting. Look at how he painted Dinah. He gave her the same attention, the same detail he gave Catherine. He didn't diminish her humanity. If anything, he emphasized it. Martin had been analyzing the images. There's something else. Look at Dinah's face in these close-ups. Her eyes, they're not looking at the viewer or at Catherine. She's looking directly at where the artist would have been standing. She's looking at Sullivan. Rebecca zoomed in. Martin was right. While Catherine gazed serenely toward future viewers, Dinah's eyes were fixed on a point that would have been occupied by Sullivan at his easel. She knew, Nina whispered. She knew he was painting the finger. Maybe he told her, or maybe she just understood, but she held it there deliberately, letting him record it. The implications were staggering. Dinah and Sullivan had entered into a silent conspiracy, using art to bear witness to an atrocity Catherine believed she had successfully concealed. For 160 years, that testimony had waited in the painting, invisible until modern technology could reveal it. Finding out what happened to Dinah after the portrait became Rebecca's obsession. She returned to Natchez multiple times, searching through every possible archive. The Beaumont plantation records from after 1862 were sparse. The Union occupation had disrupted normal documentation, and many enslavers had destroyed records as federal forces approached. But Nina, working with genealogical databases and newly digitized Freedmen's Bureau records, found a possible lead. In 1866, a woman named Dinah Freeman registered with the Freedmen's Bureau in Natchez, seeking assistance locating family members. The record included a physical description: Negro woman, approximately 28 years of age, missing one finger on right hand. Rebecca and Nina stared at the document. The age was right. The missing finger was right. Freeman was a common surname adopted by formerly enslaved people after emancipation. "It's her," Nina said. "It has to be her. She survived." They dug deeper. Dinah Freeman appeared in the 1870 census, living in Natchez with a husband named Jacob Freeman and 2 young children. She was listed as a laundress, working for herself, a small measure of independence. She appeared again in 1880, now with 4 children. Her husband Jacob worked as a carpenter. They owned their own small house. The trail grew fainter after that. Dinah likely died sometime in the 1890s, though they couldn't find a death certificate. But her children appeared in later records, and through patient genealogical research, Nina traced her descendants forward through the decades. "Rebecca," Nina said one afternoon, voice shaking with excitement. "I found them. Dinah's great-great-granddaughter lives in Jackson, Mississippi. Her name is Lorraine Freeman. I sent her an email. She just wrote back. She wants to talk to us." 3 days later, Rebecca and Nina sat in Lorraine Freeman's living room. Lorraine was in her 60s, a retired school teacher with kind eyes, and her great-great-grandmother's determined jaw. "My grandmother told me stories about Dinah," Lorraine said. "She said Dinah made sure her children knew what had been survived." 8 months after the exhibition opened, Lorraine contacted Rebecca with extraordinary news. While cleaning her late mother's attic, she had found a trunk containing family documents, including a small handwritten notebook that had belonged to Dinah. "I don't know how we never found this before," Lorraine said over the phone, voice shaking. It was wrapped in old cloth at the bottom of the trunk. Rebecca and Nina flew to Jackson the next day. Lorraine met them with the notebook, carefully preserved in an archival sleeve. The cover was worn leather, pages yellowed and brittle. On the first page, in careful handwriting, were the words, "Dinah Freeman, My Life, 1866. The notebook contained about 40 pages. Dinah had written it in 1866, during the early months of freedom. A sparse but powerful account of her life. She wrote about growing up on a plantation in Alabama, being sold away from her mother, learning to read in secret. She wrote about being sold to the Beaumonts in 1857, about constant fear that governed every moment of enslaved life, and she wrote about August 1862. "Samuel was my brother, not by blood but by suffering. We looked after each other in that house. Mrs. Catherine beat him for breaking a dish, beat him with a cane until his hand swelled dark. When I saw him crying in the kitchen, holding his injured hand, something in me broke. I couldn't watch anymore. I picked up the knife meaning to threaten her, but Samuel tried to take it from me, afraid for me, and in the struggle his finger was cut. I never meant to hurt him, but Mrs. Catherine said I attacked him deliberately. She had me held down and cut off my finger with the same knife, made me watch. Then she made me stand for the portrait holding my own severed flesh while she sat there like a queen. The painter, Mr. Sullivan, saw everything. When Mrs. Catherine left the room, he whispered, "I'm painting what she did. Someday someone will see." I didn't understand how, but I trusted him. Rebecca read the passage aloud, tears streaming down her face. 2 years after the initial discovery, the New England Museum of American History opened a permanent exhibition titled Hidden Testimony, Art, Slavery, and the Power of Witness. The portrait of Catherine Beaumont and Dinah was the centerpiece, displayed alongside infrared images, X-ray fluorescence maps, and pages from Dinah's notebook. The exhibition didn't shy away from the violence. It presented Catherine's letter, the newspaper accounts, the documentation of the punishment, but it also emphasized Dinah's agency, her survival, her descendants' continuation of her story. Lorraine Freeman attended the opening with 12 family members, children, grandchildren, cousins, all descendants of the woman whose image had been hidden in the background for 160 years. The moment when Lorraine stood before the portrait for the first time, surrounded by her family, was captured by photographers. The images went viral, The contrast between Dinah's frozen presence in 1862 and her descendants' triumphant gathering in 2024 spoke to something profound about resilience and survival. Major news outlets covered the story, but the most meaningful responses came from other descendants of enslaved people who visited the exhibition. They lined up to see the portrait, to read Dinah's story, to understand that their ancestors' testimonies might still exist in hidden places. The portrait itself had been completely recontextualized. Catherine Beaumont's name no longer appeared first in the title. The painting was now labeled Dinah, Identity of Enslaved Woman, documented by Robert Sullivan, 1862, and Catherine Beaumont. The wall text focused primarily on Dinah's story, with Catherine's biography relegated to a secondary panel, an attempt to correct the historical record, to center the person who had been deliberately marginalized. On the second anniversary of the exhibition's opening, Rebecca watched visitors examine the portrait. A young black woman stood before it for a long time, reading every word, studying Dinah's face. "She looks like my grandmother," the woman said softly. "Same eyes. Like she's holding on to something nobody else can see." Rebecca approached them. She was holding on to the truth, and she made sure it survived.